Greetings, denizens of the internet. We have denizens of the internet. My earpiece is falling out. Today we have a special guest. I won't mention his name yet. If you are younger and not Canadian, or if you're not younger and not Canadian, you might know him as Call Me Chato. For those of you that are Canadian, we know a little better, and we'll go into that in a minute. However, I just wanted to go into very quickly so Paul, I guess you know his name now, but I didn't give you his last name yet. Canadians, you might know already. We had some difficulty selecting the perfect press image, and it was really hard to pick. So we have the sort of runners-up because the intro was already done. I really think we should have gone with these three, but these were the runners-up that probably should have been the first one. This one's particularly epic. I rather like that one. That one would have been a good way to start it. It just, the hair, I think it's great. That's sort of my mental position all the time. The other one that I was thinking about was this one. I particularly like that one. This one's not bad either. Little sedate, but, I'm sort of partial to the other one. But anyway, I'll let you guys decide in the comments. It's a new show, so we're very, very happy to have Paul Chato here, Call Me Chato. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, those of you that are Canadian should remember our Canada's greatest aluminum superhero, Mr. Canoehead. Mr. Canoehead himself. Paul, did I blow your alter ego? I hope I didn't.
No, I'm fine.
Are you sure?
He's pretty much retired.
He's pretty much retired? Okay, yeah, it's the last grade secret. So without further ado, Paul Chato, everybody. Oh, I'm going to interrupt you one more time. I want to plug your stuff. I don't have any merch yet, so you should buy Paul's stuff because he's got these nifty T-shirts. Because I think the T-shirts are great. I'm going to literally pick one up myself. So.
Oh, thank you.
Well, Paul, thank you for joining me. So, what are you up to these days?
Trying to retire, but writing and doing fun stuff, and you can't really get comedy out of your vein.
Think so.
And but 7 years ago, I tried to convince the Frantics to do this new thing called YouTube, and they didn't want to do it. And I said, well, no. Well, I mean, you know what? Everyone was now doing something on their own, and we hadn't done something in a while, and we were in the middle of compiling the best of our radio show, Frantic Times.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? If all we need to do is rent some kind of hacienda on, Florida or something, and write sketches, but in the new YouTube thing would be to actually record us writing the bits, rehearsing the bits, pitching the bits to each other, and then not even having to perform them, just the process. Because part of my greatest memories with the Frantics weren't necessarily the actual shows that we did, and I don't know, I think we've done more than 10,000 live shows, was the travel to them. That it didn't matter if we were on a 5-hour trip in some van somewhere with Chris Walworth driving. It was just nonstop mayhem, farting and laughing and Rick making jokes, and it was the most joyous time in my life, were the trips between the gigs. And so I thought, well, why don't we find a way to capture that part of it? Because YouTube, I could sense at the time, was about verisimilitude and personal experience, not necessarily coming up with some kind of slick product. And the other guys didn't see the point in it. They were at their careers where they're making money. They wanted to know what the payback would be. And I said,
understandable.
Yeah, no,
sure.
I wasn't mad. And then when they just sort of went, nah, I don't really see it, I went, I'm starting my own channel. And then I've been doing this for about 7 years, and now I've got Call Me Chato, which is doing very well, and I've got a new channel called Appalling News, spelled Apauling News, where it's pretty easy to find the most ridiculous nonsense out there because I think people have gotten stupider. And all I do is play that back. I mean, I advertise it as, what is it? The most honest, fake, real news in the world, or something like that. I can't even remember what my own catchphrase is. Anyway, I'm having fun.
I like it.
Thanks. I'm having a great time. I mean, I just have an outlet for my creativity. I mean, there's some good side and bad side to YouTube. The good side is that you can write, record, and actually broadcast something. Done. As opposed to the old model where you have a gatekeeper,
Yep.
You write something, and then you pitch it, and they're not the right kind of gatekeeper because they've got some kind of agenda. Or then you go through another 10 different gatekeepers, and then finally one of them kind of likes it, and then they want it changed. And then, the person's girlfriend wants it changed.
Oh, yeah.
And then you got to find a distributor for it. And then that takes a year. And then you find out whether you're greenlit, what your budget is. And I mean, it's not just the old way of doing things. It's still the way of doing things.
It is. Yeah.
So YouTube is great in the sense that I don't need anybody. The bad thing is that if I'm trying to do anything long form that does have to go through all the gatekeepers, I really don't have the patience anymore. Although that being said, I just finished writing 2 screenplays with a writing partner, and they're being looked at.
That's
so
great.
Anything can happen. So again, it's if you're a creative individual, just don't stop being creative. I don't have any other advice.
Well, I think it's good advice. The other thing that's nice about YouTube is, I mean, I'd been following you on YouTube since, because I didn't even know you had a channel until a couple of years ago. And I'm like, is that Paul from the Frantics? Oh my God, it is. And I think at the time you had, I want to say maybe 3,000 or 4,000 subscribers. Like, it was pretty early on.
Sure.
Okay. And now I think you're at well over 100,000, I think, eh?
Yeah, I'm getting close to 130,000.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Was that gradual? Like, it seemed pretty quick for me. I mean, we're still only at 4,000, so it gives us hope.
So I have, my channel has gone through different phases. It started off doing kind of a Casey Neistat, Cinema Verite vlog family stuff. Because, I mean, I know how to shoot stuff, but YouTube is its own thing, and you have to figure out what YouTube is. Being professional is not necessarily useful on YouTube.
Yeah, I noticed that real quick.
But there are people out there who are doing absolutely super slick stuff, like Veritasium. He's got like a gigantic channel, but he was also early on. There's certain first mover advantage. Yeah. But then, I saw other people like, somebody I just absolutely love. I can't remember his name, but it was clear that he started off, lost his way, dropped dramatically. I could see he was getting depressed, but then found a new shtick that then took him to the next level, because also YouTube went through a bunch of adpocalypses that forced people to change. So at the very beginning,
I remember that.
At the very beginning, I tapped into my geekdom because I thought YouTube, really liked that stuff, and I concentrated on Mac things and PC building, and then I did some of my biggest posts were how to build a Hackintosh, and then the price of video cards went up because of Bitcoin, and it was no longer fun. I mean, I remember I was part of the era where literally just unboxing a case was something to record. Mm-hmm. And while that's stupid, I think it fit the zeitgeist of the time, and people were happy with that kind of content. Now what's happening is that unless you're you've advanced with the times, like Steve from Gamers Nexus or Linus Tech Tips, where they now have a vast number of, in the case of Linus, a vast a bunch of employees cranking out stuff.
Yeah, he's huge now.
He's huge. and even Gamers Nexus. Now he's got all sorts of testing equipment where he's going into the minutiae of a power supply, but that's what he loves. This is his shtick, is, you know, but that's not how they started. They were just happily slamming PCs together, playing a few games, and that would be it. And now it's become a business, and you know, everybody who built their channels on the coattails of Apple, which was a good run, especially with the iPhone, that's all dead. And then one day I went, you know what? I'm hearing all these complainers on YouTube about entertainment. As a former network executive, I have some insights both in Canada and the United States as to just what's going on, and so I rebranded my channel, Call Me Chato, which I thought was kind of funny, because that's how they called you back in, you know, my time in grade school and high school. They always called you
last
by
name.
Last name. Hey, Chato.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was kind of fun throwback. And then I called myself a former network executive presents XYZ. And my very first video under that auspices was, I don't care about the quality of something. My only job was to keep my job.
Yep.
Which was kind of refreshing and different. And it showed what the networks were interested in, and as opposed to just complaining about a video or a TV show, and that took off. So when you saw me, you know, at 3,000 or 4,000, it skyrocketed after I came up with the former network executive handle.
That's smart. That's unique. And speaking
totally
of,
unique.
Actually, if I could just angle in there. So, I mean, I wasn't a network executive. I'm tripping on my words here. However, you know, we both have been in television production for a long time in Canada with the major networks here. Woo! And I wanted to kind of provide our American and international viewers with a little bit of insight. So those of you that watch Paul's channel know that things are a little interesting in Canada, and it's almost, I don't know, how would you call it, Paul? It's almost like somewhere between this kind of light European America can't quite figure it out. And I think you were the head of comedy at CBC, I believe, from what was it, 88 to 93 or something, or 90, something like that?
For 3 years, from 89 to 91, I guess you could say.
So how did you jump into that, and how did you deal with it when you were there? Because that's one thing a lot of people don't hear about. The executive, like, I've seen it, you know, had colleagues in that wind up in the executive ranks, but it's like this magical, mysterious thing, and it's just, you have to deal with a lot of the same crap as everything else, you know.
Well, I mean, Canada is, I think it aspired to be a mini BBC. Its biggest problem, even when I was there in '89, was the audiences were falling for broadcast. CTV was beating our ass, and really CBC, I never thought it was comfortable as an entertainment entity. They saw themselves purely as a news service. Yeah. And entertainment was kind of this accident that they spent money on, that the news department, which was all powerful, didn't really see any value in. That's, again, CBC ran away and hid behind news. That was my complaint.
Damn you, Kevin Sullivan.
Well, no, he was the guy who did Anne of Green Gables.
Anne of Green Gables, but brought all this really heavy drama back into the 80s. You know, huge. And CBC that joke at the time, fell flat.
Kevin, no, it was Starmer at the time. I don't remember his first name, who was head of news at CBC, and we did briefly they did a brief dalliance of comedy, but nobody there really had a sense of humor. Although that's not really true. There was a couple times where I managed to hang out with Peter, the newsreader, Peter
Mansbridge?
Peter Mansbridge. Very funny, super nasty, sardonic sense of humor. I mean, he was very funny. It's too bad that he couldn't convey that on the air.
I wish we saw more of it. I mean, when he showed up on the Royal Canadian Air Force more than a few times, and they all loved him, and he was great.
Well, he played it straight.
Yeah.
On there, he played his character. I loved the Air Force; they were great. There was also a Bill Campbell. Unfortunately, he died. I was good friends with him. Very smart in a Stephen Fry kind of way.
Oh man!
I think he was actually a Rhodes Scholar. Bill Cunningham. Damn it, I can't remember his name. Just the sweetest.
I feel like I know the name, but I'm not gonna bullshit. For some reason I just can't think of it either.
Well, get one of your assistants to search for it while we're talking.
Hey, Kilk. My dog doesn't want to get up.
Damn, those damn pets.
Yeah.
So it might come to me as I'm yakking away here. So CBC, Yvonne Fitzanne came back from NBC and was the golden boy. He was the one who kind of kickstarted City Television News.
He's
brilliant guy.
Brilliant. He was at CTV when I was there. He was unbelievable.
Yeah. He interesting guy. I could never really figure him out. People were afraid of him, but I loved him. I thought he was great. He was very honest with me. I have some great stories about him.
He was always nice to me.
He was nice to everybody. No, I mean, he deserves all the success and accolades that he got in this country, and he loved this country, or loves this country. I mean, he was involved with producing Kim's Convenience.
Yep.
So I mean, the guy really does have wears Canada on his sleeve. But he's an interesting character. I think he preferred to be in the background and not really be out front. But I loved working with him. He was weirdly funny, and he gave me all the rope to hang myself. That
tended to do that to people.
But he was always up to us. It wasn't up to him. Right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, So I thought I learned a lot from him in terms of management. I think he was disappointed in that. I thought that maybe he had this notion that I would take over from him. That was just, I don't know whether it's true or not.
It's possible. He was very.
I just couldn't handle what was happening at CBC anymore, and they had let 1,200 people go in my third year, and not Yvonne, but they wanted me to stay on and keep reading scripts, because I had read about 1,100 scripts by that time, and I phoned back every single writer, like everyone, and went over their scripts. And
I don't do that anymore.
No, well, they didn't do it before, but as a writer and a performer and actor, I wanted to treat other people the way I wanted to be.
That's cool. It's the way it should be, not the way it is, but I think that's big of you to do that. So moving from, because it's interesting, because you're going from the performing and the writing and the creative background, how did you find the transition going from basically the performance writing side to the executive side, where you're essentially having to adjudicate the material and, in a sense, decide which one of your many worthy colleagues, as it were, should go on air? How did you find that transition, and overall, what was different when you moved into that as the executive?
So I was, for the most part, not the business manager of the Frantics, but that was another woman who was fantastic at it. But I was kind of the pushy guy, let's say it. I was the most pushy guy. So I learned a lot about business just being the pushy guy at amongst the Frantics. And I thought I could take on the role of being an executive. I'd seen everybody else do it. I didn't think they were doing a particularly good job.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I could lead a department. And Yvonne, after the Frantics finished, he said, "Hey, would you like to come on board?" And I said, "Yeah." I thought, "Sure, let's do it." Now,
Patch Adams effect, basically.
So because I was left to my own devices, the thing that I was tasked to do was try to figure out how to bring sitcoms or make sitcoms work in Canada. Mm-hmm. And the best way that I thought I could do that was to go to the United States and talk to expat Canadians and bring them back to teach us here how to do it.
Yeah,
so that was my plan.
To me.
And Yvonne absolutely was fantastic about that. And so I went and met with Stan Daniels from Mary Tyler Moore Taxi, Burt Metcalf, who directed, I don't know, a third of the MASHes. He's from Saskatchewan. He was from Saskatchewan, by the way.
I actually didn't know that. Learn something new every day.
And then I met with a bunch of other people from that. It's funny because nobody from CBC TV. It was hard to get hold of anybody at CBC TV, but I could literally phone the All in the Family people and make an appointment. I could easily phone the people doing Barney Miller and I could make an appointment. Like it was so easy to meet with the biggest people in the United States. But
that
meeting
hasn't
with anybody,
changed much. That's been my experience. I haven't called anybody like that, but
lately since the aughts, I think it's become more difficult in the United States only because not as much production is being done, and you've got all this DEI bullshit and everything else, and COVID didn't help. But it was just a fantastic time. So Burt Metcalf was wonderful. He took me around himself to the Directors Guild. I watched, can't remember what the name of it was, but a early cut of a Spielberg film, and it was great. And then he came up and directed 3 episodes of a show called In Opposition that didn't work. It was fantastic. So, and one of the things actually I wanted to find out, this is weird because I'm a nerd. This will be a shock to everybody. Was why did Canadian sitcoms look different from American? And there was that time where people would go, "Oh, that's a Canadian show," and immediately there'd be this bile that went up in their throats and went, "Oh, it's Canadian."
Yeah.
So that's a very bad start. So I wondered, well, why do the American sitcoms look so different? And the thing that I found, and I'm talking about the ones that were shot on tape, not the ones that were shot on film, like Cheers.
Yeah.
And I saw Family Ties, Cheers. I mean, I went to see tapings. It was fantastic. The difference was that Canada, number one, because of our the amount of power that we had available in any studio. Plus, we came from a tradition of theater and documentary. We had all these theatrical lights, Licos and Fresnels, which you might understand, but other
they
people
have
might
different
not.
color temperatures, and they just make things. I don't want to interrupt you with that. I have a little bit of a, once you're finished with that, because I think this is important that people know. I have a little story about that to jump onto it. It's also an old CBC station. But I keep going with that. That's important.
So the lighting was all from theater lighting, and maybe it'd have 500 watt, maybe 1,000 watt light here and there. And when I went to see the taped American ones, what was amazing was they pretty much had nothing but 10K lights.
Yeah, they're all as uniform in the United States.
They're all 10K lights.
Yeah.
And the way they changed the amount of light that was on a scene was to put fiberglass spun in front of it in multiple amounts.
Yep.
They weren't reducing the amount of juice going to the light, which would change the color of the light. They threw spun up. So every light was on full, except for a night scene or something like that. Okay, I mean, but that's why they got that wonderful look to it. Now, the thing is, to be able to pull that off, you had to have massive generators, which, not generators, but you had to have massive electrical, connecty-doies.
And they have to be clean. They have filters on them to make sure that there's nothing.
Yeah. They're not vibrating. Yep. And so every studio that you go to in the United States, if you go to Paramount or whatever, you'll see that giant building. And then attached to that building is this fenced off area with just transformers. That's what I was talking about.
And all the sound stages have them. Every single one has their own.
Yeah. Have their own. There's no way we could have afforded that up here. And so that was, I mean, right now you don't need that. That's why Son of a Critch looks so fantastic. It's actually one of my favorite sitcoms, period. That's a brilliant sitcom. So, you don't need that anymore. Technically, we're just as good as the United States. Mm-hmm. But nobody watches our stuff up here. That's a different conversation. So I'll stop there for a moment, let you talk.
Oh no, this is stuff that I want people to hear, because these are the sorts of things that people don't really think about until they run into it. And the other thing is, even now, sometimes you'll run into cases where even production people don't want to hear it. Well, that's not the case at all. It's like, well, yeah, actually it is. There was one technical thing that I wanted to add to that, which is there's two things that would contribute to that, particularly in the 70s and early 80s. One is, and you would know this better than anybody, but the tube-based television cameras, they reproduce light, like they basically deal with light in a different way, right? And as you know, a telltale sign that just watch anything on the CBC or even in the United States that involves stage lights or a music performance, you can see this kind of halo, right? It's actually burning the tube. The cameras needed quite a bit more light at that point, and they were more contrasty. And the CCDs, which you started to see in the early 1980s, and even when I started at CGOH, we were still using cameras from the 70s and 80s well into the 90s, at least for local production. Now, they were doing some national stuff with it. But the cameras were slower. So, and what I mean by, well, you know this, Paul, but for those that are watching, slower meaning it needs more light to produce a picture, and is there more contrast. And one of the things that I had completely forgotten about in Kingston, I think they've long since fixed it. CKWS had this issue for a long time. I remember going in and doing some stuff there, and every interview, everybody kind of looked sickly, and it was because they had two different banks of lights at completely different color temperatures. So they'd have the morning show. I think, I forget who was hosting at the time. I think Wolichka there from...
I wasn't watching.
Oh, you weren't watching? Yeah.
No.
Well, they kept... The production values there were fantastic. CKWS is an amazing station, but they had 3200K and 4500K and 5200K, which is basically like a cool blue light, and it made everybody look sickly. Yeah,
that's sunlight. Sunlight is 5400K.
54, yeah.
But 54. They weren't tungsten 54.
They had tungsten
halogen
mixed with well, the HMIs, the old lights were HMIs, so they were
right. You can't mix that indoors. You can't. You can't, especially with a favicon camera.
No, you can't. I mean, even if you don't get strobing, if you look at the scopes, the scopes don't like it. You get weird warbles and things like that. And the other thing that you get, which I particularly hate, you get that sickly look. You can't combine. And they had I said, they fixed it, but they actually had a mix of old HMIs like scoops, from probably
Right.
the late 1960s, like This Hour Has 7 Days era, with the big claw that comes down. We had them at CGOH, but we weren't even using them at the time. They still had them there,
Hand-me-downs.
mixed with early LED lights and and soft lights. So it was that's all I had to say about that. So
Wow.
it just a variant of that. And at least the cameras were all CCDs. So when you were at CBC, are there any interesting, not bad stories, but any interesting, fun stories that kind of stuck with you as an executive there?
I mean, there was a
really
couple of
hit you?
things. Well, one was more nerdy, technical. The CBC was a DEC PC shop. So Digital Equipment Corporation with their shitty PC, which never really worked with Windows software properly. They had their own kind of weird version of, not Windows, DOS. And so I, in my little group, it was about 5 of us, I brought in Mac SEs, and I brought in a Telnet converter that converted all the DEC communication over to Mac, and I was able to read all my email and write emails, everything, and we used something called a Shiva modem that all of us could go out into the not the internet, but we could send emails to people over CompuServe or whatever services at the time, that we all shared the same modem. So and we were all networked together, and nobody at the CBC had the same capabilities we had. In fact, I brought in HyperCard, and I started programming video disc, historical video disc stuff at CBC. So we were like way ahead. And then I remember I got because I was also working for Apple as a consultant. They brought me over to show me this brand new thing called QuickTime, and it was this 1-inch by 1-inch piece of video running off a hard drive at 10 frames a second, and that to me was staggering. And I ran back to the CBC. I said, we need to digitize everything, Wojak everything to this QuickTime, and then send it over, the modem so people can play it at home. So this would be 1990, and they thought I was crazy. So yes, they're right. I was crazy. I was a little bit ahead of my time, but I would suggest to you that I predicted our present situation back in 1990. So
I think that's a fair assessment, because my earliest recollections of HyperCard were basically playing through the school break, doing Cosmic Osmo.
Ah, yes. I loved HyperCard. It was one of the greatest inventions of all time. It was really, really fun.
You could do quite a bit with it.
Oh yeah, you could adjust. It was fantastic. I automated my entire group of people. Automatic mail retrieval, and on a certain time frame. It was pretty cool. So what else? I mean, I got to produce a bunch of stuff. It didn't work for various reasons. I mean, it worked to a degree, but one of the problems at the time was we had lots of acting talent, but not enough writing talent. That was really the Achilles heel of the business at the time, that there wasn't enough people who knew how to write sitcoms and comedy. And the fact that there was such a fantastic process in the United States for bringing people along before they were really allowed to write anything. And it was hard to compete. I mean, the depressing thing with Canada and the United States versus the United States was every single network would commission 50 scripts, and then they would produce 20 of them.
Yeah, huge.
And then they would air 7 of them and keep 1.
Yeah.
And there was just no way that we could do that up here. There was no budget for that, but we tried our best, and I had just a fantastic time and met tons of people, and gave a few people their first jobs. I'm trying to remember his name, Stuart, from the drummer from Bare Naked Ladies. I hired him as a warm up stand-up comedian, and I think to this day he still remembers that. And there were two other kids in the hall, Mark McKinney and Kevin McDonald.
No way.
Both of them were hard up for cash, and so I asked Yvonne if I could hire them as script readers just to get them.
Oh, that's
cash.
awesome.
So they were both destitute. They didn't have any money at all. I don't think they remember that story, but if without me there'd be no Kids in the Hall, they would be waiters at some restaurant.
I think one of my favorite sketches, Kids in the Hall, is "Screw You, Taxpayer."
I can't remember that.
I know it's on
YouTube.
That did it. Yeah, it was like basically where the guy just breaks all the props and he goes, "Oh, it's not my money." It's like, I think it was like which character was it? He goes in and he's basically, I'd really like to take your daughter out, and it ends up that she's in an urn, and then the audience starts to gasp, and then the guy breaks the character and breaks the fourth wall, and he turns around to the camera and goes, "Wow, what a bad sketch, and in such poor taste. You know what? I bet you don't think you paid for that sketch or whatever." And he's like, "But you paid for it anyway." And then he goes on, it's like particles going into the Atlantic Ocean or whatever it was. Your tax dollar, like, it was really, really ballsy. I'm surprised they were able to get away with it, but it was
you
pretty
could get away
funny.
with a lot. Could get away with a lot back then. The Kids in the Hall were unbelievably edgy. The first year of their show was really fantastic. That was a terrific year. Yeah, good guys, funny guys. Mark, if you're listening, remember, I gave you some money to read scripts.
Yeah.
For me. You do, Kevin. I could make a living by doing my Kevin McDonald impression. I don't know if I'd make any kind of money.
That's pretty cool. That's very cool. But you know what? Everybody has to give somebody their start. So if we can go back a little bit, now I want to talk a bit about how you and then we'll go back even further, but your background writing and comedy, and how did you basically get into that? I'm guessing that went back quite a bit, and then eventually the Frantics. When did it first hit you that this was what you wanted to do, and then how did it go from there and evolve into the Frantics and a bunch of the other stuff that you did?
All of us in this field always wanted to be performers in some way. You don't always know what way it's going to be, but from a very young age, I was performing, drawing comics, being funny, trying to be funny, working on the school sketch show, April Antics, and then going to Ryerson, and then Ryerson had Riot, which was a well-known sketch show at the time. So it's you're just doing what you're naively loving what you're doing. There's no plan. You're planning things along the way. There's no goal. There's really only direction. Mm-hmm. And there's also happy accidents, but those happy accidents only happen if you're doing shit. If you're not doing any shit, then you're not open to any of those accidents. So, April Antics, Rick Green, who you might know from Red Green. And
every
also
Canadian knows
Rick Green.
Rick Green.
And History Bites.
Bites.
And Prisoners of Gravity.
Yep.
So he and I went to high school together. He was a year ahead of me. And we were working on sketches together for April Antics, plus he was doing the Super 8 movies like The Beast of Buffalo, and he would bring me over to his house to show them to me. And again, this is again how our relationship evolved. They didn't know how to expose the film properly. That drove me nuts. So he was much more into the comedy. I was going, oh no, we got to get the exposure right. So then I became the camera guy. And I had a Sekonic light meter, and I made sure that the exposure was right on his stupid Super 8 movies. And we did, Beast from Buffalo. We did Ninja Nun. I mean, just the stupidest thing in his backyard, in his front yard, and everywhere. And we became friends doing that. He went off to Waterloo to become for physics, and I went to radio television arts at Ryerson. And you'll love this. So I wasn't allowed, because of the clique at Ryerson, to write for the first 2 years of Riot. And it was a very big deal. There was something called Spring Thaw. There was a comedy industry at the time. I'll talk to that. I'll try not to make that too long, but it's a super important.
They're like the Canadian version of the Ryerson's version of the Cambridge Footlights, basically.
Yes, that's exactly right. So Spring Thaw was one of those shows where you went in tuxedo to watch. And in its time, Riot was a competitor to Spring Thaw, and you could fill 1,000-seat theater to watch it. And Spring Thaw had people like Don Herron and Gordy Tapp and Jack Duffy and
big
Diana.
Classic names. Big classic names.
And I had the pleasure of actually meeting Don Herron, and brilliant guy, like just insanely brilliant, funny, wonderful human being. And a huge star that nobody in Canada really knew was a huge star, which is, welcome to Canada. The definition of a Canadian superstar is someone who gets recognized on the subway. And that's my joke. I copywrote that. And so now, unfortunately, the 2 years that I was at Ryerson, the people involved with Riot just made the worst possible shows. So by the time third year came along, the bloom had fallen off the rose for Riot. It was no longer a big, important thing. And so finally I got to become head writer. I had two other writers. I submitted a whole bunch of sketches. They hired Don Cullen to be the director. Don Cullen was famous for running the Aurelia Comedy Festival along with a Brit. Paul.
My producer grew up in Aurelia.
Aurelia? Yeah. So the Aurelia Comedy Festival Leacock Comedy Festival was very important. And so Don was involved with that, and they brought him to direct the show that we had written, which was unusual because usually you've got Ryerson people to direct it. But notwithstanding that, he was a well-known name, but he couldn't do it. So he handed off the duties to direct the show to this fellow named Mark Breslin. Do you know who Mark Breslin is?
I'm going to say no. I've heard the name floating around, but rather
so he
than
started
bullshit
Yuck
my
Yucks.
way, I'll say no.
No, he started Yuck Yucks.
Oh, geez.
So
that's embarrassing. Okay.
No, it's okay.
I'll eat that. I'll eat that.
Huge name in comedy.
Yeah.
And who's done like an amazing service in Canada. There's people who hate him, people who love him. Very controversial guy. I'm good friends with him. I think he's I don't know where stand-up comedy in Canada would be without him. But notwithstanding that, so he hated everything that we had written, chucked it. So that made me, I think, what's the word? Bitter? Yeah, that's the word. And so they put on their show. I went and saw it. Of course, it was horrible.
Yeah.
And I went, what am I going to do with all this material that I wrote? So I thought, I'm going to put something together on my own. I won't charge for it. I'll do it in the pub and I called it Vendetta Productions Presents Riot Rejects, which, curiously enough, halved my class. There was one half of my class that absolutely hated me for doing this, and then the other half.
You turncoat, yeah.
Oh, people were ripping off the posters off the walls, like the Israeli hostages.
Yeah, well, you know what?
People were ripping off those posters.
Oh dear God!
And so I could get two girls, Judy Gans and Susan Higgins, who are very funny, really good comedians, who were there at Ryerson with me. But I couldn't get another guy because all the guys were failing, and they were busy studying. Rick had now finished his year at Waterloo, so I called him and I said, "Would you like to do it?" So he came down, and we did 3 nights of it. People liked it. I think the show was shit, but people seemed to like it. And then Rick and I and the 2 girls created a comedy group called Change Channels. Mm-hmm. So without Don Cullen coming on board, without him bowing out, without Mark Breslin coming on board and chucking all the stuff, without me then doing, Vendetta Productions, then grabbing Rick, and then Rick and I becoming a 2-man comedy troupe because of that, and then running into Peter Wildman at the Pink Flamingo and Dan at the Nervous Breakdown Coffee House, the Frantics would never have existed. So Mark Breslin is the reason for the Frantics. It never would have happened.
It's funny how that, I probably shouldn't use this as an encouraging statement, but sometimes spite can be a very powerful tool. Yeah, you know what? Screw you. I have a good product. I have a good idea. I'm just going to go and do it.
Yeah.
And if it bombs, at least it's on my own friggin' terms.
Screw you. I'm going to just... Hold on. I got to get some water. I'll be right back.
Oh, no worries. So while we're waiting for Paul to get some water, I'm going to give you a beautiful picture of Canada's greatest aluminum superhero, and I will fill the air because I am too lazy to edit. And I will also provide another shameless plug. There we go. I'm too lazy to edit, so I'm just going to fill time. We aim to please.
I didn't know whether people wanted to keep seeing my Make Canada Meager again. I thought that was a funny hat. That's actually available for merchandise.
Is it? I'll put something in the... I'm one of these people where I don't care if people get offended. So I don't think it's that offensive.
How's that hat offensive?
I don't think it's offensive at all.
It's been a long time since we've been up there with meager. We're like way below that.
Yeah.
We need to return to meager.
But you know how the internet is. People just complain about everything for the sake of complaining about it. And
that's how you make money. It's one of the things which I don't like about YouTube is that if your peeps are part of the complainosphere, then you just have to feed that, and then you can make tons of money. Yeah, and I don't want to do that.
No, there's ways to kind of subjugate that. I think you found a pretty good way of doing that, because you're calling stuff out in what I think is a thoughtful, well-reasoned, entertaining, and frankly academic way, while hiding that it's a very well academically structured, almost sort of essay. And I think you're also saying what, if we're being honest here, what a lot of people are thinking, and might not necessarily feel comfortable saying.
I'd like to think so. Yeah, and plus I'm now fed up. I don't care.
Yeah, just there's a certain amount of freedom and not giving a shit.
Yeah, not giving a shit. So I'm, and knowing that the Frantics officially abandoned any idea of getting back together about 10 years ago, which I think was the wise thing to do. I don't want to be the white snake on tour again, thing. It's just to me that's embarrassing. So that's again. So the other point that I wanted to make that's really important, that is different now from back then, is that as the Frantics or the nascent Frantics progressed, you have to understand that there was actually a comedy industry. And this is key to the success of anything, because nothing happens in a vacuum. Monty Python was not the only sketch comedy in the UK. As far as the Brits are concerned, yeah, but as far as the Americans are concerned, Monty Python is the only sketch comedy group.
Yep.
That happens, but there was the two Ronnies, there was the Goodies, the Frost Report. I mean, you could name maybe 50 comedy acts. And when the Frantics were doing their thing, I think you could probably name 20, 30 sketch duos and groups that were, coming out, exploding, reforming during our entire time. You also had print comedy in Spy magazine, National Lampoon magazine. You had Saturday Night Live. You had maybe Wayne and Schuster were still on. Maybe you had the Air Farce on radio. There was just and then the innumerable records: Bob Newhart, Bill Cosby, Red Fox, Moms Mabley.
Radio shows. All the stuff
radio
on
shows.
CBC Radio had a ton of comedy shows on radio. Air Farce was on radio from what, 73 or something like that?
Easily from 1832.
Yeah. And then before they were the Jazz Society when they were with Bronstein there.
Yep. I know. I knew Bronstein.
Yeah.
We talked a bunch of times. And so what you have to understand is that the Frantics were successful, but within the context of 50 other sketch comedy groups that were performing all over the city. We weren't alone, and we were also lucky enough to be around when Second City was at the Fire Hall, and we would go there every weekday, or I would at least, and we would, us destitute comedians, would watch comedy for free. We would watch the improv segment for free because they would let the audience out after the paid show, and if there was any room, those of us who had lined up, we would watch the improv. So we got to see Candy and just a whole crap.
That would have been amazing.
Yes, just Justin, Catherine O'Hara, Dave Thomas. It was such a fantastic time. Of course, we didn't know it at the time, but it was such a great time to be there. I mean, I was there for one improv session, which Robin Williams showed up.
Wow.
And so
that's unbelievable.
They would be doing so. They would work up through the improv. Second City would then create sketches, and then the improv segment of the show stopped being true improv, but they were now rehearsing sketches that they had worked up for the next run, right? And so they were not really improv anymore. There was kind of a cheat, and they would ask the audience questions, but it was all bullshit. But we didn't care. But I remember Robin Williams arriving during that segment of the build-up to the next show, where he would literally then walk onto the stage and start interacting everybody and just completely fucking up the rehearsed sketch. And there was such Steve Hempel and Mark Hempel, John Hempel and these other people. They were so good that I don't know whether he was on that night.
Were they workshopping? They were sketches to some degree, or
they did so that's what they would be doing. They would workshop it,
right?
And then but that time when Robin Williams showed up, they were now just rehearsing it, and these were fake workshops.
No.
But it didn't matter. No one cared. But he went on and completely disrupted the sketches and forced the performers to start improvising again, which was great. Yeah. And then it was great. He was there, and then the rest of the audience had left, and I was hanging around, and I heard him say, "Does anyone know where the Hard Rock Cafe is?" Because his friend Levon Helm was playing. Yeah. And I went, I know where it is. It's a 20-minute walk. just around the corner from where they were, and then up Yonge Street. And I said, I'll take you. And he went, okay. And so I got to walk for 25 minutes with Robin Williams, and we just chatted about stuff.
No way.
It was fantastic. It was really good.
Unbelievable. It's interesting to look back at some of that stuff now. Even just some of the early, obviously the SCTV stage stuff. I mean, obviously I would have been there to enjoy it live, but even just going back to some of the early CBC, SCTV, and seeing a very young John Candy.
Yep.
Basically.
Well, we're all young we were all young at one point.
It's not so much that he was young, because I just turned 40 and I'm not thrilled about it, but who is? No, it's not so much that he was young, it's that he was parodying Lou Bagoy.
I don't remember that, but that's...
It was like, it's on the internet somewhere. It was
is it? Okay.
early, and he's basically dressed in drag as Lou Bagoy.
I don't remember. I remember that...
I'll see if I can find the clip and I'll send it to you later.
Sure. She was angry because everyone thought that she was a guy. Lou Bagoy. Not Luba Goy. Anyway, she was the...
God. Yeah.
I'm not joking.
So I had heard, I didn't get to work.
My point. Anyways, my point was that there's no equivalent now. I mean, how many comedy movies were being produced at that time? Also, I mean, it was, and nice comedies. And I'm sorry, comedies that weren't 40-year-old virgin kind of dirty stuff. Not that I didn't love that movie.
It had some structure or whatever.
But there was stuff. There was just like a wide version of movies, and I mean, you had Eddie Murphy with, what was the one about Trading Places, and I mean, comedy movies were a staple. And there's really no comedy movies around. There's no comedy in print. There's no.
That's a good point.
We have no industry, so it's going to be very difficult for anybody involved in the wanting to be part of the comedy industry to try to make it work, because there's not very many outlets. Man, I wanted to write for National Lampoon so badly.
Did you ever approach them?
Sure. And I sent them stuff. I got in with some Canadian magazines called Gaslight.
Yep.
Which was fun to write for, and I did cartoons for it too. It was great.
I know of it, but I haven't actually seen any copies of it and had the pleasure of taking a look at them. I'm sure they're around in like the Toronto Reference Library or find copies of them somewhere. How long was it?
I'm sure. It was on and off. Warren Clement, who wrote for the Globe and Mail, was the person who kept that alive. And again, someone who super clever, articulate, as opposed to me, very, very, how can I say it? His grasp of English was impeccable. And I think that was one of the reasons why he wanted to do it. He wanted it to be a spy magazine, not spy, a Private Eye, like the Canadian version of Private Eye. So we tried our best, and I don't think it really made any money.
That's cool.
But I have a bunch of the copies here.
Oh, that's very cool. Like, because it seemed like in the 70s, early 80s, even going to maybe the late, actually going back to the 60s even, guys, there were a lot of these larger-than-life newspaper columnist guys that could sort of, I hate the word transcend, it sounds like an artsy wank to me, but it seems like a good word. Like guys like, was it Nathan Cohen?
Oh, yeah.
And he was quite funny.
The reviewer.
He had all these, I think he was like the critic or something, and he had all these funny articles. But he was on CBC, I think, in the 60s. What was the name of I'm trying to remember the name of the program. He ended up having one, I can't remember who it was with, but one of the guests on the program had some outburst and said, so-and-so comes and goes and I remain forever. And then he turns around and he says, not on this program, and cuts him off. I can't remember.
What? It wasn't on this hour is 7 days or something?
I don't know if it was This Hour Has 7 Days. I'm trying to remember the name of the program. It's driving me crazy.
I think I
can't remember the name of the damn show.
Yeah, no, he was the one. He was the first critic that really didn't. If something was crappy and Canadian, he would say it, and which hurt an awful lot of people's feelings, because the predominant script at the time was, you've got to give the substandard Canadian productions a break because they're Canadian.
Yeah,
and he said, no, I'm not going to. I'm not going to. If it's crap, it's crap. So
yeah, he saw Yeller.
What?
That's bad. If it doesn't matter if it's Canadian or not, just go back and shoot the dog if it can't be resuscitated. Sorry.
Yeah.
Bad joke that didn't land.
They didn't get it. Yeah.
No, this is why I'm not a comedian, and I'm just an idiot producer that likes TV and somehow is.
Well, although you have a very slick website, you're doing all these industrial videos.
Yeah, it's funny. We make a good amount of money on that. The show does okay. I actually prefer doing the not prefer. Prefer is the wrong word. The industrials and the commercials and the post-production that the company does. It's nice that they're in and out. And then a lot of the live stuff, it keeps the team busy. It keeps the team busy. We've got probably about 25 people. And then, I don't have to let anybody go, right? So
Oh, good.
Yeah, so we've had the same people for 6 or 7 years now. John Stroll is actually our music director. That might be a name that you might know, because he was the music director for the Raccoons. He's,
I don't think I ever met him, but the name kind of sounds familiar.
He worked with, Kevin Gillis.
Nope.
Kevin Gillis, he created the Raccoons.
The animated show.
The animated show, and then before that, he had a few kids shows on CBC. Yes, you can. I trying to remember who was the head of children's programming.
You can't do that on TV.
You can't do that on television. Was actually done at
Ottawa.
In Ottawa, yeah, that was actually done at CGOH, and the guys that taught me when I started working there right out of high school, they were all, you can't. So what was interesting about CGOH is they were doing a lot of syndicated programming out of there. They had a paper company called Carlton Productions. And they were doing not just You Can't. They were doing, so they had You Can't Do That on television. They were doing, I believe, The Galloping Gourmet for CBC with
yes.
Graham Kerr.
Graham Kerr,
yeah. And, throw your breath into the pans, ladies. And they were also doing soaps. They were doing that Dark Shadows knockoff, Strange Paradise, that ran for a few years. Yep. They did that out of Studio A, which was actually my studio for the longest time. I mean, this is about you and not about me, but that's kind of how Skycron came about. I was a teenager still, and I went to school later, and then I came back because I was going to go into animation, and I didn't really like animation, and I was at Sheridan for a couple of years in the animation program and managed to get in. But anyway, yeah, so I started right out of high school because at that time there was no CTV Creative Services. It didn't exist. And my mouth was always big. It was a little bigger then. And basically they would do all these cheesy commercials. But at the time it was before Bell Media bought them. They owned 15% of them. And it was just when they were moving from being an affiliate to an O&O. So they were in this weird kind of no man's land. Yvonne, I think, he was still at CTV Network proper. So they hadn't completed it yet. So Studio A, which was by far the largest soundstage in that facility on 1500 Merivale, for insurance reasons, internal employees could not use it. So they couldn't use it for commercials. They couldn't use it for any kind of production work, and they couldn't rent it out. So they had this perfect, ready-to-go soundstage that all these shows had come out of. You know, you can't do that on television, and on and on and on and on. And so what they did is Max Keeping, God bless him, he was like, okay, Corey, well, we need commercials, and do you want to make some money? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, do you want to do this for a living? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. He said, okay, well, at the time, they had a lot of commercials that they had to do. And he's like, tell you what, we're going to give you an edit suite. We'll set it up in Studio A. You can use our internal lawyers. You can use our internal business people. You can use all that. We'll let you set up a little company. You can have Studio A. That'll be the Skycron Studios, so to speak. And you edit all of our commercials for us, and we'll pay you whatever it was a pop. And at the time, so this would have been the mid-late 90s, very early 2000s. And I ended up having to hire my best friend because we couldn't keep up.
Wow.
And we were still doing it when I got accepted to Sheridan. So Porter was brand new then. So up until probably 2005, 2006, I'd finished my class at Sheridan, and I would take off to basically take the GO train downtown, and then I would take Porter. This was back when they had only 2 planes, to Ottawa from the island, Billy Bishop. And I don't know how, and basically I would go, I'd have Devin there, and then he and I would edit this stuff on the weekend, collect our check, and then I would fly back to Toronto, Toronto and then Oakville, in time to finish my classes. And I did that for 3 years and somehow managed not to drop dead. And then kept having to hire people, and that was sort of how that started. I'm going off on a tangent a bit,
you're
but that
blasting through a lot of cash there, though.
Huh?
You're still blasting through a lot of cash.
Yeah, but the clients were billed for it.
Yeah, no, you would have been better off to just. Did you charge them the Billy Bishop flights?
Yeah. Well, the thing is I think I undercharged too much for the commercials at the time.
Okay.
Because I didn't know. I was like, 19, 20? Probably could have charged 3 times as much.
Probably.
Well, there was no production being done anymore at that time. There was nobody else. There were like 1 or 2 companies that were doing industrials. So that's sort of how that. But yeah. So anyway, they were doing CGOH had their own, and they even did their own syndication too. And then they had a couple of deals and stuff with, but they were kind of weird that way. But,
I'll tell you that. I mean, I deal with an awful lot of Americans, obviously, on my channel, and I do collabs with Friday Night Tights and Midnight's Edge and George the Giant Killer and a whole bunch of people. And what's interesting is the number of people who remember You Can't Do That on TV.
It was huge.
It's unbelievably famous.
Yeah, and nobody had any idea at the time, because I mean, the studios at the time were in the middle of nowhere. There was like a Dairy Queen right across the street.
I'm trying to remember the show, and what's happened to the actors in it?
I think most of the people went on to normal lives. Some of the producers went, like for Jurben Hessling, we all know him as Ben. He directed the series, really, pretty much all of them, dating back to, because it was a local show first. It started running locally in 1979. And then I think Nickelodeon picked it up. They packaged it, and then Nickelodeon picked it up, I think, in 1981. Most of the cast went on to normal lives. There were a few that did become kind of working actors for a while. Clea Scott, she did, I think, Millennium and a couple of decent American shows. We all know what happened to Alanis Morissette. She was on it.
Yeah.
But she was sort of like doing everything in Ottawa at the time. Her face was everywhere. Jeffrey Darby, who was the producer, went on to move to the United States, and he was an executive at Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon ended up hiring him, and he was working there for a long time. And then I think he moved over to Oprah's new network, and I'm not sure what he's doing now.
I'm bringing up the cast, and I absolutely remember Ruth Buzzy was on it.
Yeah, she was.
How did they get Ruth Buzzy?
I have no freaking idea. And you know
She's
what?
very funny.
She is very funny. And of all the crazy, nerdy questions that I asked when I was there, I was constantly hearing, you shouldn't know this at your age. You shouldn't know who these people. It's like, I like TV. You know, whatever. I was just one of those weirdos.
It went for a good long time. It went for 5 years.
It did run. It did go. You can't? You can't. It ran
5 years.
It ran on Nickelodeon from, I want to say 1980. Yeah, it ran on Nickelodeon from 1981 to 1989, but I think there was a 1-year hiatus. So yeah, like 6-7 years. But then it also ran a couple more years locally because it was like an hour show.
It looks like that Nikki was part of the Nickelodeon deal. Ruth was part of the Nickelodeon deal.
That must have been it. Because she flew up. She flew up and did it. And all the big sequences like that, they would shoot them in Studio A. And then the Link set, I think was in Studio D. That was a weird studio. I don't know how anybody got in there. Because it was like, it was sort of shaped like a wedge. And the other weird studio was the news studio. Because Studio B and C were next to each other. And then what was then production control was next to it. So you had to be really careful if the news was on, if you needed to go through and get to another stage. Because if you didn't have the finesse of a really horny member of the Cirque du Soleil that wasn't getting any, you were going to hit a controller or something and screw something up. But yeah, it was interesting.
It's hard to get that. I mean, the changed channels went to Scarborough Cable TV, which was the first SCTV, Scarborough Cable TV. And we did a whole bunch of stuff. I actually have it on my personal channel, which I don't show to anybody. But that was all done on 3/4 inch, and I edited all. No, I didn't do it. I edited some of that. But
3/4 inch is a pain in the ass. We were still 20 years behind even when I was there. So we knew was Betacam SP even when I was there.
Well,
That's
up until a month ago, I still had my Betacam SP deck here.
Oh my
God. From 1991.
I still have my old 2800. I need to.
I got rid of it. I chucked it.
Did you? But did you digitize everything you needed to?
Pretty much, and I got fed up with not worrying about. If I went, you know what? No one cares about this stuff if I die. Who cares?
No, you shouldn't say that stuff. There's still dojos all over the place doing boot to the head.
Oh yeah, no, that's for sure. But I've got some great industrial stuff I now have. And what's so funny is just how tiny the files are. They're 640, 480.
Yeah.
They're standard def. They take up no space on my servers.
You were doing some nifty industrial stuff in the late 80s, early 90s. You know, people look at arrows and stuff, but I remember, you know, some of the systems they had, like the early 3D systems, it'd take you hours and hours and hours and hours and hours just to do an arrow.
Yeah, we would. We had an interface that would let me take my Macromedia animations and record them out a frame at a time to the Betacam.
Yeah.
So I would set up the animation, leave, and then come back in the morning, and I'd have the animation. And every frame, don't forget, you had that 5-second pre-roll, right?
Yeah, you have to have the pre-roll.
It would hit the frame and then stop.
Yeah.
then the but the thing, it was smooth as silk. I mean, that's what was delicious about it, is that I would come in the morning and my Macromedia animations, my my 2D animations would be just absolutely beautiful, and it was the only way to output them.
Yeah,
At the
there
time.
wasn't really any other way. There weren't.
So
You could only do a lot of this stuff a frame at a time.
yep.
And even on, like, this didn't matter if it was on videotape or film. I'm trying to remember, there was a big post house in Toronto, and they were kind of like the ident. How were they called? They're called.
Not multiple images.
No, it wasn't multiple images. It was before that. It started with O. Optimus. Like, it was something like that. They did all the stuff for CTV where everything was chrome. From 1984 to 1988, everything was chrome.
Omni something.
Yeah, it's driving me crazy. But yeah, they had all this crazy stuff and some proprietary
Silicon
stuff.
graphic stuff, and and when they showed a cube bouncing around the screen, and
That
like
was
it
big
was just-
medicine.
now it's like no big deal. I mean, I started editing on a 2-inch Ampex. They even taught me how to slice it with a razor blade
Yep.
by using a magnetoscope
Yep.
to see what the iron filings were doing. But and I did editing on the Sony 900 and then Avids, and then it's just. But now I've got this Apple Studio, Mac Studio, and I've got Final Cut Pro, and I got terabytes of storage in the other room in my. With a 10 gigabit Ethernet connection that I don't even edit locally. It's all being edited.
You don't need to,
on
and
my
you're not
servers.
eating up space. It's funny. You hear people say, "Oh well, I don't really." How do I put it? I don't know if I'd say I miss those days. I miss the idea where you had to really think about what you were going to do in order to get something that looked decent. But I don't miss. Because it's
The
so
waiting.
easy to do. There's
The
no
speed,
waiting now.
No, the speed is great. All the graphics, and you'll like this. I was actually at the CBC, and they brought me in because they knew I was a nerd
Yeah.
to show me what they were going to be getting as their new editing system. It was the Edit Droid.
Oh man, that was Lucasfilm system
Now,
there.
Lucas also invented Avid. Let's not
Yeah.
forget.
Well, the Edit Droid, I think, basically ended up becoming what eventually was Avid.
Yeah. The Edit Droid, for those of you out there who are maybe interested, was a table with an editing wheel similar to a Steinbeck editing setup that's used for editing film. Beautiful made.
The sewing
table.
machine, I used to call it.
The sewing machine. But we didn't work film. And then they had all these tiny 3-inch black and white monitors in front of you. Each one of those monitors was attached to maybe up to 24 not SP beta, like home beta controllable decks behind some kind of unit with glass doors. So what it did was calculate. And you had maybe at the most 15 to 20 minutes worth of that you could edit. And you would have to duplicate the raw stock as many times as you had beta decks.
Yeah.
All in this unit. They're all connected together using serial cables. And the system would figure out which deck was closest to the clip that you wanted to use. And everything was constantly. And you'd see and it worked actually fairly well. I mean, it was
It's like the first
shockingly
online edit system of sorts.
Yes. And now still you had to conform to a final production because it just gave you an edit list.
Yeah.
They gave you an edit list and you had to take it to maybe a Sony 900 and then.
But you could plug it in. Once it gave you your EDL, it would just go ka-chook,
Yeah.
ka-chook, ka-chook, ka-chook,
Yeah.
and then put it in
Yeah.
and just let the deck go.
Yeah.
Which was
Yeah.
awesome.
But what a Rube Goldberg setup it was. But it worked actually fairly well. But you had to also maintain those beta decks, not Betacam, beta decks, because you were beating the living shit out of them. And CBC was ready to sign a check for it. And I went, no. I was at NAB, not too, like, the same year. I saw Avid. Do not buy this. It was $1 million or something like that.
Ooh, that's...
And they were pretty mad at me because I was telling the executives to not sign the check for this. The tech guys were drooling. They wanted
I'll
to
bet
sign. They wanted it so badly, and I said no. This is all going to be done 100% in software and hard drives. Do not get this, and that's what happened. I think EditDroid was killed the next year, and Avid was brought out. So I saved you taxpayers a ton of money.
Well, you know, in a way, it would almost have been worth to spend $1 million to just have the thing go and put on like the Raymond Scott Bugs Bunny track, that bam 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 bam, all the weird.
Well, I mean, just think of all the tape and stuff that you had to keep in storage just in case you wanted to do a re-edit.
Yeah, and they'd get wiped a lot of the time. I don't know about CBC. When I was at CGOH at CTV, they would just, as soon as it was done, they just wipe it, just reuse the tape.
Wow, that's terrible.
Of stuff. Yeah, especially on. Especially the old 3/4 stuff. They kept some stuff, and then there was the fire. But a lot of stations at that time, they would air it, and then they would just wipe the tape.
Yeah, it's too bad. Times. It's too bad there isn't that kind of pirate, let's use this studio kind of excitement and fun anymore. Everything is kind of really tied down. There's no way you could walk into the CTV studios up on wherever it is in Toronto and say, hey, we just want to fuck around for a bit.
No, they can't do that anymore. And even in the late 90s, if that was the one thing, but that was the one thing that I have to give guys like Max Keeping credit for. If you were a loudmouthed kid with a big fucking mouth, which I had and still have, it's been subdued and punched in a few times, they would hear you out and give you the chance to hang yourself with your own rope. It was like, hey, I could make a better TV show than, because at the time, well, not so much in the 90s, but a variant of that, there was a point, and you would know this, Paul, where the CRTC required that I think all Canadian stations have, I think, 60 hours of local programming.
Yeah. And that's why we ended up being able to use the Rogers Cable Studios in Etobicoke. I mean, that was really key to be able to do all that stuff.
And you would get your chops on it.
I got to get back to work.
Yeah, we're going on too much. So let me sign off real quick, and then as soon as I do that, I'll go back to you real quick. And
is this the way you wanted the interview to go?
I would say yeah. I don't feel the need for it to be Letterman or anything like that. And to be honest, this is the second one. We did Eric Nagler yesterday.
Okay.
And so, yeah. Well, Paul, I know you have to go. I believe you have a movie to go to tonight.
Yeah, no, that was actually last week. But
last week.
There might be another. There's the new Warner Brothers movie with Daffy Duck and Porky Pig, I think, is coming out tonight. So I'll go see that. Well, I don't want to keep Paul. So, Paul, thanks for being with us. Corey, a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll send you that link afterwards. So stay with me until just after, Paul. So we'll just sign off here. So number 2 of the new podcast in the can while we figure this stuff out. If you liked this podcast, please do subscribe as always. And we've got a Patreon. And if any of you happen to need commercials or video, skycron.com/go.